This is Season 2, Episode 14, the season finale of Mastering the RPG, a tabletop RPG podcast all about upping your game. Doesn't matter if you're a game master or player, you'll find advice, ideas, and some strong opinions. Our episode tonight, our RPG best of times and worst of times, or gaming is such sweet sorrow. Everyone, welcome again to Mastering the RPG. Like I said, it's a tabletop RPG podcast all about maximizing your game with advice, cool stuff found, answering some emails, which we have tonight, and we hope you get something out of it. I'm Carl with my co-hosts Eric and James, and you'll find information about the show at masteringtherepg.com. You can send us an email with feedback or questions at gamemaster@masteringtherepg.com. So, we're here on the mics again for the season finale of Season 2.
It's good
to... Yeah,
Sorry.
clapping.
little
Maybe I should add a sound effect there. Well, it's been a great season with you guys. How are you doing tonight? What's going on?
I'm going well, Carl. We're suffering through blizzard-like conditions here in Australia. It got down to 50 degrees today, so... we're going all right. Got a bit of a cold, but doing well. Very, very busy at the moment. Playing lots and lots of games. Games for kids start next week. I'm playing in a brand new Dungeons and Dragons campaign. Got a couple of new players join a game last Monday night. It's all happening. Lots and lots of games going on. It's very, very busy, which is strange, but exciting at the same time. Very cool.
Nice. What you been up to, Eric? Anything fun and exciting?
I mean, more of the same as far as the gaming goes. Some big projects here that are not related to gaming, but yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same,
Sounds good. Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously we're in our campaign that's going on. Yeah. Starting to get it's starting to rise to that climax. They discovered a way that they might be able to pull in the forces at work maybe into their clutches if they can pull something off. So anyway, so that's fun. So it's good to have everybody here. I'm pretty excited about this episode because this episode we're going to be talking about some of the best things we've been doing or the best times we had playing RPGs, whether playing or being a GM, and then some horror stories, I like to call them, of the games that we are playing. But what's cool is today we have an email. And we have an email from Rob. Thank you, Rob. And his question is, we all have played fantasy and many have had adventures in space. What setting or genre do you feel is underrepresented? Is there a world you wish you had an opportunity to play in? That's a great question. It goes right along with our theme, I think, for this evening. So, James, what do you think about those two questions?
Yeah, great question, Robert. Thanks for sending it through. Look, infinite realities which we play in. So, and I might not be the best person to ask this question because I've played a lot of genres and quite happily switched genres from bits and pieces. I think possibly underrepresented in the genre, and I know, Carl, I think you probably agree with me, is kind of the very traditional sci-fi part of role playing. Fantasy role playing, I agree, is by far the most common, and I play a lot of it. And I do play a little bit of fantasy in space. We played games like Spelljammer, Planescape, those kind of games, and I've played quite a bit of horror games in space, kind of, Alien, that kind of genre. But your straight up space exploration, space sci-fi, Star Wars-y like game, I have not played a lot of, and I'm not sure there is a huge amount out there anymore. Travelers on the shelves everywhere. The Star Wars RPG had a pretty good run, but I'm not quite sure what's happened in that space recently. But for me, it's probably the hard sci-fi, the kind of the space exploration in a very science way. It's probably
very much.
Is a little bit low.
Yeah, I think I'm very much on the same page with you. That's my number one is hard sci-fi, not sci-fantasy, because even Star Wars falls into more because you got space wizards.
Star Wars
around,
is
right?
fantasy in space.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah.
even-
So you got space wizards running
Yeah.
around doing stuff.
we're
Hard
talking
sci-fi
about Star
where
Trek
it's really
that's harder than Star Trek, right? Because Star Trek itself is still a little.
yeah. Even Star Trek, honestly, they pull out the technobabble to solve all
Yeah.
problems. Versus
And space
being
magic,
something that's
space wizards too. Don't forget about all the space wizards, like Q
Yeah,
and things
yeah.
like that, right?
Yep,
Space
for
goblins.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, space goblins.
For the Ferengi.
And then another one of mine is kind of post-apocalypse, but isn't zombies, nuclear war, some space-time rift or something? Just something that there's just a general falling apart of society. Like I think of like Twilight 2K
2000.
without the World War III happened, but without that kind of side of it where kind of things have just generally fallen apart and you're trying to live off the land to get to where you
Yeah.
need to go.
Carl,
I
let
think that'd be
me label that for you. Hard post-apocalypse.
hard.
right?
Also.
I mean, right?
Yeah. Apparently, I like stuff that's way too sciencey based. I guess I don't know, but
I think it is, and this is something very, very interesting because I think it's the conceptual and the more like exploratory. And I think it's funny because I think in LARPing, there's a lot of LARPs, and I know especially internationally, there's a lot of LARPs that will like kind of deal with more serious themes. And it might be like, I know like, there was an episode of an amazing podcast called Imaginary Worlds where he talked about LARPing. And there was this one in Europe where it was like a small village in like Holland or something during World War II. And it was just like, they just LARPed out this scenario, like dealing with like Nazis coming in and stuff like that. And it was very serious. So, and like, I think that's kind of the same, like, can we explore these themes of a post-apocalypse without having these like, larger than life or zombies? And I think that's the thing that people kind of shy away from maybe. Is actually exploring some more like serious themes without all like the fun of like magic or whatever, or like So I think that's I guess that's my point. Is that it's kind of interesting that that is a space that's not really well explored, right?
Yep.
That's a good point, isn't it? It's interesting, isn't it? But we don't do a lot of period gaming without putting a fantastic or, in my case, horror overlay. Like there's a lot of Call of Cthulhu that's set in Dark Ages and Middle Ages and Victorian era and bits and pieces, but it still has that overwhelming fantasy element that's thrust on top of the period drama. There isn't a lot of role-playing games that are period pieces,
yes,
for example. Like this, just straight up, doesn't need the fantasy, doesn't need the goblin, just using the intrigue and the setting of the world.
Yeah.
I wonder why.
Yeah, I mean, because it is more mundane feeling maybe, and I think that it's almost easier when you're designing a system to have the fun parts and to have a lot of like problem solve with magic or whatever your magic is, and to have the fantastical creatures and sense of mystery because it's fantastical in whatever way it is. So I think it's honestly probably harder to design a compelling setting and compelling mechanics that don't involve some type of fantastical element in whatever genre you're talking about.
Well,
I think that's
plus,
the main reason.
Well, I think plus part of it is people aren't experts in science and all the things that go along, and they don't keep up with all the latest science trends. So fantasy is easier because it's just fantasy, right? You can do what you want to do, and you can change things, and things work the way they work. You don't have to understand how nuclear fusion works, and that's the reason something works. So no, it's just there's magical dilithium crystals that make stuff work, and it's all fine. Don't worry about it. So I think that's part of it too.
Push the red button and it happens. Yeah, for sure.
The easy button. We push the easy button and magic happens. So
and I feel like with hard sci-fi too, like there's the concept or the thought that the person running it, or it's going to be so like, oh, we need to like know math and like graphs, and okay, you really have to be in on this. And part of us when we're playing, we want to like bring stuff to narrative and kind of maybe hand wave stuff away that we don't need to like get so technical and bogged down with the details. So I think there's a kind of a fine balance to running something that's very hard.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right? Of like representing that there's science based, but not getting like bogged down and having, being so hung up on technical. So for me though, which is interesting because, I did bring up the whole like mundane thing, but even with some fantastical elements, I still feel like Greek and not just the like technical level of Greece, but also like that kind of mythology, but also like, their technology level of Greece and kind of like Bronze Age and before, like Sumerian, like all of that fantasy or not is very underrepresented. So like having like something set in the Greek, in the Bronze Age, if there's fantasy or not, just either way, like that's just very underrepresented. You don't see that much. It's usually we're talking about medieval times, and it's usually Renaissance level of technology, right, for most of our games. So
yes,
and also culture too, and then also for me, like Weird Wars, and me and Carl were talking about this before that. Anything that we said, we're like, oh, Savage Worlds has a setting. And it does. Like, literally, Savage Worlds has the most settings. And pretty much anything you can think of, they have a setting for it. And they have a Weird Wars thing. But what I mean more specifically is, like, either, like kind of more modern, like, set in a war environment. So, like, World War II, World War I, Civil War, that kind of thing. That's not, like, horror, like Cthulhu, right. I think. Having maybe fantastical elements during that kind of time, I think that's also very underrepresented. And is kind of ripe for gameplay.
Cool. So what, with that in mind, so what would you like to have an opportunity to play? Is it the same? For me, it's different. For me, I just wish I had a chance to play in an investigative cop drama. Our TVs are just inundated with things like NCIS and CSI, and just there's tons of this, but I don't think I've really had a chance. Now, I've run one where it was and now just one of my favorites, I'll mention later, where it was a buddy cop, and there was 2 players, and they were, like a buddy cop kind of thing. But I'd love to play in one, and I really never had an opportunity because people don't tend to run those because it's not a cast type thing, right? It doesn't play out for 5 people. Maybe so when you talk about Call of Cthulhu and people have to go to the library and investigate stuff and things like that. But that's something I would love to play in. Is just a good old-fashioned, modern, figure stuff out, get the bad guy. Even if there is fantastical elements and the bad guy's a vampire, I don't care. It'd be fun.
It sounds like I need to run a modern Cthulhu one-shot for you, Carl. Just run a couple of characters and kill you in horrible ways. It sounds perfect.
Well, I'd hope that I'd solve the crime before I die. How's that?
Well, the key to a good Cthulhu game is you solve the crime just before you die.
As you're dying? As you're dying?
That's right. Oh, yeah, he did it. Yeah, that's right. For me, there was a game that I ran a one-shot for way back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I wish I could play it, and I wish I could run it again. And it was a game by White Wolf called Wraith the Oblivion. It was a ghost story, effectively, but the entire world is set up in a Ghostlands kind of societal structure, where the ectoplasm of ghosts can be forged into physical weaponry and chains, and it had a really, really bleak kind of setting, almost like a Romanesque kind of culture that was there, interlaced with the usual kind of gothic punk that White Wolf used to do. And I loved the little one-shot I ran with a couple of friends, but it never got enough traction and popularity with people. It was a really bleak game. You had one of the wonderful things about the game was you played the person to your left's alter ego and dark side. So everyone, you actually role-played the other person's shadow and tempted them with shadow dice to take a darker path. And it was such a really different game, really varied, with a really interesting setting. But it was bleak as hell. Like, if you're playing dead people, it's not a pleasant game to play for long term. But I really wish I could have had another go at that. And I might find some hapless victims that'll play that with me again. But yeah, very strange, very wonderful game that I wish I got a chance to have a go at it. But how about you, Eric? What's on your wish list?
Well, that sounds cool. I want to try that now. What I said, I would really like to play kind of Bronze Age, kind of Greek, Mediterranean triems, like that kind of island hopping with that just that kind of feel. What's maybe fantastical, like gods are, how they are and walk among you, and like that kind of feeling. I think that would be really cool. Something that I've been wanting to play for a long time.
And I could see a cool campaign that brought in the sea people and the collapse of the Bronze Age. Oh boy, you could run something pretty epic there, I think. So very cool. Well, hey, again, thanks, Rob, for sending an email. We love to see them and love talking about them. And that really got our juices flowing on thoughts. And we had bounce stuff off the mic, and it was pretty cool. Thanks for the email. So let's go ahead and get right to the main topic.
Mastering the RPG with Carl, Eric, and James. Yeah.
All right, like I said, we are going to talk about for our season finale, some of the cool things that we've played in, GM'd, and some of the horror stories. And so let's just, without further ado, let's just jump right into them. So let's talk about some of the best things that happen. In playing. Eric, you play a lot more than all of us. What was one of your favorite or a couple of your favorites that you played in, and what made them so memorable?
Are we rotating through, or we're just doing all of them at once?
Well, if you need to take a breath of air, we'll jump in and talk about ours.
Well, I mean, again, not to pander, but like legitimately, both James and Carl games they've run have been some of my favorites, like for sure. I mean, Carl, I think you're going to talk about this in your GMing, but Chicagoplex 2090 was a really, really, really fun game with super interesting characters and a really compelling narrative. I loved my character like so much. I like to play kind of humorous, chaotic characters at times, and that was definitely the most chaotic. I mean, I literally had a death wish. Like he was a daredevil, and he wanted people's approval so bad. I did the most death wishy things, and I had the best luck with dice. I mean, I literally pushed my limit. I rode on it was a cyberpunk game, and I had dual mono whips were one of the most dangerous weapons because they could easily hurt you, and they did massive damage. And I was dual wielding them while riding a motorcycle at extreme speeds, and nothing ever bad happened to me except one time my idol I tried to do just a little stunt, and I crit failed, and the bike fell on me, and I farted in front of her. So it was just a really, really fun game, and I made stuff for it. Like I remember when we had a new we were doing you were looking for a new player, Carl, and I made a basically advert in a newspaper from my character's point of view, with all of the just humorous, because I was a cat person, so it's a lot of I was bring a pound of catnip and $20, and it's things like that. So I got really into the character. And then James games. I mean, honestly, the pirate game, when I first met James, we played this pirate game, and I was really, really getting into that game because James knows that setting so well. And I, my character kind of started out, he was a lot, but I think we worked together, and it really, it wasn't he changed things. So we had this really interesting backstory that I was really looking to explore, but unfortunately that kind of fell through. So we never got a chance to really explore that. But there was a lot of cool times where I think both of us really got into, the lore of the setting and the world. And I remember I went really hard on a ritual once, and James was coming back at me really well. So it was really good back and forth. And then of course, Fey Touch, which had basically some of the best players I've ever played with. And we were extremely role playing, and you can watch most of the episodes on YouTube now still, if you're curious, Fey Touched. But I mean, again, he knows the setting so well, and it was just very rich. And a lot of improving. I mean, we mostly role playing, really, and the characters were really deep and just a really cool. And I love Sylvan stuff, which was funny because everybody else played a Sylvan thing, and I was like, I'm going to play the most un-Sylvan thing possible for this game. And I played a Kobold Artificer that wasn't comfortable in a forest. So those were some of my favorites from them. And then real quick at the very end, which is funny here, is that this is one of Carl's horror stories, but a Necessary Evil game. Just because I love that setting of Necessary Evil, and I made the two supervillains that I got to make were just fantastic characters, and other people had really funny characters, and we got to play them off. And then finally, one of my, just at the top of my head that came to it, is a kind of a Mouse Guard short campaign. Now, Mouse Guard is this really cool graphic novel that's also a game, and it's just fantastic game. It's really different. I mean, talk about underrepresented. You play a bunch of mice in I would not really fantasy, but there's anthropomorphic mice, anthropomorphic animals, and they have this kingdom, and there's the dragons are great horned owls, and everything is super. All the mechanics are very immersed into the world. Weather is a big mechanic because you're little mice, right? And so it makes you feel not very strong, but really charming. And so, yeah, and the game itself was really cool. Everybody was really down to improv. So that was another really, really cool game.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I'll jump in. I don't get to play as much, and so it was a recent game that popped to mind as one of my favorites, and it's actually, call out to Eric. It was one of the campaigns he was running for a short period of time, and I got to play a Mr. Fix-It
Mr. Handy.
robot.
Mr. Handy.
Mr. Handy, sorry.
Yeah.
Mr. Handy in a Fallout. I'm not a big Fallout fan, so this was like discovering this world of Fallout was part of the fun.
Yeah.
Because I had no expectations because I'm not a Fallout aficionado. But I played this robot, and I started off as more of an NPC because I couldn't be there, but he just had such personality. He was a lab assistant robot in the previous times at a college, and so he somehow imprinted the college football team on him, and he was a huge football fan, and he wanted to be accepted by everybody, so he'd attempt to do tricks, and he just happened to have a kind of a laser torch flamethrower, and so he tried to do tricks with that, and he would start buildings on fire accidentally, and hilarity would ensue, and just the mannerism. I got such a good chance to role play him as he would have his mannerisms and how he would speak, and that alone, just being able to kind of immerse in that character, I really, really enjoyed. So thanks to Eric for that little bit of fun that I got to have as a player, for sure.
Carl, I'm a bit like you. I haven't had a lot of time playing, but I've got two, I think, really amazing experiences where I've played that actually have changed the way I run games as well. I think anyone who runs games a lot really should play if they can, just to see what it's like from the other side of the screen and get a sense of kind of how it feels in terms of how a game runs. My first example is from a long time ago now. We're probably talking 25 years ago. I played. This was my first Vampire the Masquerade session. And I'd been playing Dungeons and Dragons and rolling, beating up goblins and orcs for many years, but then played this one amazing game with a storyteller, and I'm so sorry, I've forgotten her name, but it was a game that lasted 10 hours. We started at sunset and played pretty much through till dawn, and I reckon we rolled dice twice as the whole group. It was a free-form role-play experience where it was all character driven and all plot driven and quite wonderful, and it changed the way that I looked at running games after that, to add more character, more plot, more depth, more role playing, deeper NPCs, I think. And I'm so, it was a one shot, but it was at a party and we just kept on playing and no one wanted to stop, and so it was one of those games that kind of went on and on and on. I then later on turned that game into some radio dramas that for university, and it just kind of kept going, and it just stuck with me. The Ziontes and the Toreador, and that kind of crew was an amazing role-playing experience. The other example I'd like to talk about is the one I've just finished. We finished a Dungeons and Dragons campaign that got to level 20. Our Dungeon Master Stu was, and I hope g'day Stu if you're listening, quite a unique Dungeon Master in that he does a lot of homebrew and a lot of drawing down from lots of different myths. So we did a lot of Japanese mythology, we did a lot of Syrian mythology that were kind of the basis of a lot of his storytelling and the basis of a lot of his monster making. But one thing that really got me was the epicness of that game. The fights were extraordinary. The games that you feel like at any point we're all going to die, at any point the world will be lost, at any point we can rise as heroes. Just this epic nature of a campaign that really built over the course of many years. And the last months of that campaign, when the fate of the world is in your hands and you're watching the effects of the decisions you've made years before, quite epic. And so really raising the stakes in terms of the massiveness that you can do in role-playing game, and just throwing the mundanity away and say, no, we're gonna do big things, which is something that I tend to not do. I guess when you're storytelling in a lot of games, you kind of, in some ways, keep the powder dry a little bit. You don't kind of do the full-on end-of-the-world epic stuff. And when you actually get to play in one of those campaigns where the fate of the world is in your hands, really, really good fun as a player. Really, really awesome.
That sounds fantastic. That's cool. That's really cool. So we'll stick with you, James. Let's talk about on the game mastering side. What awesome stuff happened there?
Yeah, all my awesome stuff about games mastering is about players, really. It's really interesting, isn't it? Like, at the end of the day, you write games that you hope your players will engage with. You hope that you're going to create stories that are fun and that are engaging and that players are going to respond with in terms of story and NPCs. All of my favourite games have been about players that have done that have taken the idea and the kernel of the idea of where the campaign's going and responded in significant ways, that have bought into the story, that have had a really good time. I played in an epic game years and years ago of Werewolf the Apocalypse. We ran in a game set in Australia with a whole heap of very close friends. And again, an epic game, saving the entire world from extra-dimensional forces, huge epic combats, lots of very cartoony-like combat, really, really amazing epic encounters where the fate of the world was on people's hands, and the players lent into that and were really heroic. When sometimes with these kind of high fantasy, high adventure, high epic like games, you want to throw caution to the wind. You want them to be, teetering off, collapsing buildings and fighting to the bitter end, and those players did that. So for me, that was a really wonderful, wonderful experience. I'll shout back to Eric with Fey Touched. That was quite a unique experience for me. I'd never run a streamed game before, and it was the first time that we really auditioned players, which is something that you don't normally get to do you? You get to kind of get friends, but when you can actually audition and select some players based on their just amazing acting and role-playing ability, I felt very, very privileged with that one. And in that game, it was a game where, because you're streaming it and because you know that other people will be watching it, everyone was on their best behaviour, but also you end up putting a lot more effort into both your creation of the world and creation of NPCs and your acting of those NPCs and making sure that your story plot lines are transparent and easy to understand, and then you just unveil it to these very, very talented role players that just gave me just so much joy. There were many times in that game that it'd be 15, 20 minutes before I'd realise I hadn't said anything for a while, and you're just becoming a participant and a spectator of really great role playing. So very, very lucky for that one. But I mean, having said that, I think we did some great things to make sure that happened. Really rich backstories, really rich understanding about how the story was going to go, great levels of trust where you're placing the story in the player's hands, and lots of discussion offline about how you wanted to approach that game and how we would play it. So it's a little bit I wouldn't call it fake, because it was very real. It was a very real game. They had no idea what was coming at them from session to session, but just curating a game like that was very, very amazing. And I just want to do one last little shout out. I am currently running a Masks of Nyarlathotep Call of the Cthulhu game with some very close old friends that is now entering its third year. Very fun, very pulpy, very adventure-like, lots of clues, lots of fun, and we turn it into an event every time we play. Everyone comes around to my house and we pull out the old gin and tonics and kind of the props are out and the music's out, and it becomes quite an amazing. It's not just a normal put the screen out, roll some dice. It's a dress-up, fun, immersive kind of game, and I love it. I look forward to it every month and really, really enjoy it. But they're my top three out of many, many hundreds of games, but they're the ones I've really loved, and it's really because of the players. The players make these games the best.
So, I watched a little bit of the Fey Touch on when you guys were streaming it, and it was fantastic to watch. That was a lot of fun. The characters definitely made for the show, and Eric's character definitely threw monkey wrenches in and all that sort of thing to make it that much more fun. So that's cool. I personally have I have 2 campaigns and a one-shot actually for a convention. I ran a convention game called Dragonlance Top Knots and Takesis for years and years and years. And I've never played a game where I've been actually literally on the floor laughing. I mean, literally, this is not, a saying. And the premise was you were captured by the Dark Army, and you basically escape, and you're trying to take a artifact that they found, which was based on a previous adventure that was also run at the convention. So this was kind of after that adventure had occurred, and you were trying to take that and whisk it away from within the camp of one of the head honchos and suddenly Dragon High Lords. And the idea is that you try to get away, but the players who were playing the Kender, and there was 3 Kender, so first off, that's probably a mistake I made, but there was 3 Kender, they decided to go into the tent of the Dragon High Lord and take their stuff back. And then, okay, that's fine. That's kind of expected. But then they decided to steal his helmet. And just the things they did, they never got caught, but the things they were doing, just, we were laughing so hard at these players. And so it's like you said, it's the players that made the game, right? This was basically steal it, get it on a boat, go take it away kind of adventure. And it turned into this just absolute funny. Yeah, it was chaos because of the Kender players. And I'd like to revisit that again using Savage Worlds rules, because that was D&D first edition. So yeah, I just love that. I love that one shot. Second one is, Eric mentioned it, Chicagoplex 2090. Great players, lots of fun, cool characters. That game was all about somebody trying to take over. Chicago in this game was kind of a city-state surrounded by huge walls to keep it's a cyberpunk game to keep kind of the wastelands away from the city, this mega city that everybody lived in, that basically took over the entire Chicagoland area and is one big city now. And it was just so nice that I lived in Chicago for a while, so I could bring in that knowledge of the things that happened in Chicago and some of the history. And there was this force that basically wanted to take over the city, and they had 3 different ways they were working it. And the players ultimately unraveled all of them as they were going along. But they thought certain people were against each other, and they weren't. But it was all kind of one big plan with 3 different legs, and they did a great job of figuring it out. But the best moment, I think, for me personally, was that one of the characters was a cop who did this stuff on the side, who did running on the side to make money because he was a gambler and blew all his money. And none of the players realized he was a cop. It was almost like, it wasn't like hidden. It was kind of out there, and until he became the face, because he solved the mystery and they found out he became the face of the Chicago Defense Force. And suddenly all the players are going, wait, you were a cop? You're a cop? It was hilarious. I thought that was just so much fun. And then my last one is a campaign setting that I created called Vampire Empire, which basically there's an old world and a new world. And the old world is where vampires kind of run everything, and it's sort of medieval. And centuries ago, humans escaped to another land that had nobody there, like the New World. And they grew up to be a modern, with guns and cops and civilization. And this fantasy element is trying to kind of weave itself into the New World. They found out the New World existed, basically. And it was such an amazing thing because it was a buddy cop game. There was 2 people who were part of the part of the police force who knew these things were existing, and they were sort of out there trying to discover why and what was going on. And at some point, they even had to get in front of the Senate committee to explain why they were working with the vampires, because there was a good vampire who wanted everything. And it was just nothing as cool as having people role play talking to a senator, because it's like senators ask tough questions. So what you're saying is that you're for vampires. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it was just so much fun. So those are my top, really, as far as a couple of campaigns, and a lot of those were character driven too. So I didn't think about that until you mentioned it, James, but a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed those. And there's so many more I've enjoyed that Eric's played in, but those were the ones that stuck a note to me when I was thinking about it. Eric, what about you?
Well, I mean, not comparing to you guys who have a much more wealth of games behind you. But yeah, I mean, a couple stood out. And I think they stood out mainly because they were so surprising in the direction they took. I mean, while I loved the Fallout game that I made, and honestly, Carl, I think your character was my favorite, especially at the end. That game, unfortunately, just kind of fell through because a lot of people scheduling stuff and everything. But later on, I ran I guess I would say a one-shot, but I think James would call it a mini campaign. It was, I think it was 4 sessions, maybe.
4 sessions. That's a full-on
three
campaign.
sessions. And it was with a bunch of other gaming guys that I know. Then none of them knew. Well, it was many different genders, but none of them really knew Savage Worlds that well. And it was using the Fallout. It was in the Fallout world, but they really knew Fallout. And it was this. And I said it was okay. This is going to be, compared to the other one, which I was trying to be a little bit more simulationist with the post-apocalyptic elements. This one was completely pulpy, completely over the top, and it was a big heist. They were breaking into basically the equivalent of Brotherhood of Steel kind of bunker to steal this old technology. And what I didn't expect, I thought, okay, this would just be a fun, easy game just to get them learn. But they were so into they knew Fallout so well, and they made such really insane, intriguing backstories and characters that pulled from, even though my setting took place in basically what was Idaho, so it was like kind of a new, because I wanted to do my own thing using the Fallout lore. There was such drawbacks. So their characters were much richer than I expected. And the level of hijinks because of that were just so over the top. And they just like kind of leaned in so much. And the rolling was also like, Savage Worlds was crazy. So I thought people would die at times. And they really utilized their knowledge of the world to do really surprising things. So that was just like a completely over the top, basically like a train that's going off the rails, but didn't fall over, if that makes sense. Like that's how energetic and crazy it was. And then the other one that came to mind was pretty much the only, I think I did a one-shot before in real life. All my other times most of my playing and jamming have been online, but this was obviously way pre-COVID. When I was younger. But see, I never played games. I never played tabletop games when I was like, I think Carl and James, like as a kid or as a teenager. I came into it later. I was into board games, like hobby board games. But this was a in real life game that I ran that used the Faith, which is, I don't know if I ever brought it up in the podcast before, but it's one of my, it's a game from Spanish designers, publishers, that I actually designed some stuff for that they put in the book. And it's this really cool science fiction setting that's a little bit hard sci-fi, but has all these weird kind of conceptual things with gods and kind of magic from that, and cyberpunk elements and weird aliens. So it's this really cool setting, and mechanics are really interesting. They use like cards, like playing cards instead of dice. But really novel ways of mechanics, and so a really cool setting. And again, these are people that weren't the most experienced tabletop people. I wasn't the most experienced either. But the game itself, just because of the setting being so weird, I took a really weird turn and got much more serious than I ever thought it would get. And it was some like really intense interpersonal drama at times that I think that's what sci-fi does the best, is that you can like use science fiction to, I mean, all games, but science fiction can really be used to like evaluate, to really dissect kind of current world politics. And so it kind of came in. This was at the beginning of right before like 2016 elections. And so there was like the politicking that started going on and kind of getting into like what that means for these different civilizations. I don't want to get too much more into it, but it was just like really intriguing what, like, it just turned into this like kind of treatise on political ideology in, but it's like in like space and like way out in like kind of distant space, and
a good Black Mirror where
yes,
the game's
exactly,
kind of
very good Black Mirror, and kind of dissecting that and what it means to be in a society that are these two societies were was culturally so divergent, but they had to survive based on their circumstances. So it was just a really interesting, like, just turned into this almost philosophical kind of TED talk almost like about that. So yeah, that was just a really cool one because of how surprising it was.
Very cool. Very cool. So a lot of really good stuff happened, but then what's always kind of fun in my mind is learning about the horror stories. And I guess you can change the names to protect the innocent if you so desire. But let's talk about some of those, not the bestest of the games that we played. So let's talk about from a player perspective. Eric, this might be one that do you have some good ones to share? Oh, I thought so. Yeah.
I have three.
It was James's game, and he was terrible.
He's a tyrant.
He's got three bad player experiences. Oh my god!
I mean, I've more than that. I mean, because I've played so many games, and I think there was when Roll20 really exploded. There was so many new game masters who. And younger people, and not to judge younger people, but I just think generally people that maybe weren't appreciative of certain like people's time, I don't know. There was just a lot of people doing games, and everybody wanted to be a Matt Mercer. Maybe I don't know what it is, but here are my quick top three that just came to mind. The first one was the most bizarre out of all of them, and it was I joined this game. This guy had the longest player. Resume introduction, job interview. I guess it wasn't him asking questions. He's like, here, take this sheet. And what I realized afterwards that this was just something that he must have just found, and it was like easily 2.5, 3 pages of not just your backstory, but like what is your character's like hopes and dreams. But it was like, what do they think about this thing? What would they say on this scale if they were to encounter this situation? How would they react? It was like the most detail oriented. I can't think of the word right now, but survey or whatever it was that I had to fill out. Yep. So my thinking was, oh wow, this is going to be a really intense role play. He's really into character, and so which I've now come that certain times I won't make as big of a backstory because I don't want to get too invested in that if somebody doesn't care about that. But I made like a good backstory, and literally this game master, when we started the game. Not only did he not read anything, he didn't even know what class I was playing. I don't think he even knew what type of ancestry I was. Like, he didn't know anything about my character. And so it was so shallow. We went to a map, and this is another thing that, like, the combat that happened, which I just thought was weird that, like, I don't care. If you're playing off the seat of your pants, you're doing whatever. Put out a blank map, do some squiggly lines. That's fine. But it was literally like a winter map, and instead of just doing like a white background with some squiggle, which would have been sense for like a pure snowed-in area, he brought out like it was like a forest map with like elf ruins on it or something. And like, okay, this is snow. And I was like, well, why are we using it's almost harder for me now that you're using a map with like completely different, everything than just a blank white page. And then this was the cherry on top that he suddenly stopped speaking. And we were like, hello. And somebody was like, oh yeah, I play with some games that this happens. He falls asleep. He literally fell asleep during the session. And we had and just didn't wake and nothing. We just left the game. So the next later on I was like I just the game's not for me. I basically said I did it very like cordially, but that was it was like a lot of red flags, right?
Life's too short for sure.
Yes, life's too short to have game masters who. It wasn't just that he fell asleep this one time. That this time, it happens like enough that this guy knew what it was. He was doing too much and just didn't. Yeah. Anyways, another one for me was we were playing a game and the game he was running a Pathfinder. It was a game where I forget the name of it, but it was a Pathfinder AP where you play as evil. It was an evil campaign, and you basically sign a contract with Asmodeus, which is a devil lord of hell, I think. And what we found out later, so this was for 5e, but it was a Pathfinder 1e AP. And he ran the game, and he wasn't. I wouldn't say he was the best game master, but it was fine. He was doing his best with what he had, I guess. But like the other people were really good, so it kept my attention. They were really fun to play with, and I had a fun character. But then eventually, I guess that he was using a third-party conversion that somebody had made, and then that conversion had ended. So he decided to just take the original 1e version and use that, but he did not adjust any of the creature stats. And I don't know if like 5e uses bounded accuracy, right?
Yeah.
And 1e is basically 3.5 on crack, and so it was like, okay, you have to hit a 35 AC, and this went on, and it was like, dude, you can't do this, and it was just going on, and then at the same time he was trying to like start up a streaming thing and wanted to get us involved and pay money to help him out and do this. And I was like, you don't have the, in my mind, I was like, you don't have the chops, obviously, if you don't understand bounded accuracy at the very least, that you can't just grab a Pathfinder 1E monster and use that. So that one was just like, just the way that it so quickly degraded because he kind of didn't understand the basics of the mechanics behind these things. And then thirdly, another game where it was just, there was two things about it where, it kind of started out where it was kind of a run of the mill, you have to collect things for the game. But the person started putting just more and more in random encounters. And when I mean random encounters, it was like non-stop random combat encounters. And then also this person had a crush on my character, like the game master had a crush on my character and started just being very weird towards me as far as her, like I kind of became the main character and giving me things and then also kind of like talking to me out of the game and just really awkward things like that. So that was just like
wow.
And it got more, I don't want to get into the details, but it just got really weird in that way. So it was that combination of that and also just like seriously, I've never had so many boring non-stop common encounters, like just like, okay, we move 5 feet. Okay, here's some really, 10 easy, like really easy things that we had to fight that just were no challenge, but just took up time. And it was just like kind of went on like that and just kind of degraded again. So those are probably my biggest playing.
Yeah.
And I have some other ones that I brought up before with another player who eventually just got really angry and I think I talked about it and then wanted to kill our characters. But yeah, those are my, so I had a lot of passion in that one because I had a lot of those. There's a lot of kind of those, but yeah.
A little narcolepsy problem, falling asleep just randomly.
Crushes on players' characters. Oh, just makes your skin crawl just thinking about it.
Oh, yeah.
I have one terrible experience, and it made me the dungeon master that I am. And this is playing. My first ever game of Dungeons and Dragons, I played and never got a turn. And I always remember this as what not to do. I was very excited. I'd read The Hobbit. I was a young kid. I would have been about 9. And I was like, I want to play D&D. This is really good fun. And I want to play a wizard. And I want to be like Gandalf. And okay, I only get one spell and it's magic missile. I don't care. I'm an old wizard with a staff. And I rolled my hit points and I got 2 hit points. And we were ambushed in our first game, and a goblin threw a rock at me before I had a turn, and it killed me. And then they said, that's it for you. We're not going to roll any more characters because it's a one-shot, so you can go now. And so my first ever role-playing game was I didn't get to say a word, I didn't get to do a thing, I didn't get to interact with the world at all. I got hit in the head by a rock thrown by a goblin, and it was over. And I went, that's it. This game's dumb. I want to run it differently. And so bought the books and then went, that's it. I'm running it. So my first ever playing experience was so damn bad that I didn't play again for about 15 years. And I just ran games for other people because it was just so blindingly awful as an experience. I'm amazed that I kept playing, to be honest. But that was my one and only bad experience.
Yeah.
I have had other experiences, I guess, and I think everyone does, where different dungeon masters have different priorities, real world things getting involved in games, unprepared. Everyone knows all the bad DM tropes, and I think I've had all of those at one time or another. But there was nothing worse than my first ever game of D&D. Carl, what was your bad player horror stories?
Well, I've got 3 that really came to mind right off the top of my head. 2 are one-shots from conventions, and one was a campaign I was in, and I was in a campaign with Eric on this one. I came in late, so it was Necessary Evil. He enjoyed it, but I came in late, so I think I came in when it was 3/4 of the way done, and I had a character that I thought was just a cat's meow, and we were in a battle, and he was using his powers really cleverly to stop a dragon, I think, from tearing the party apart, but he got captured. And the players went to save him, and the game master basically, when they opened the door in this mansion, he'd roll a die. And I think on a 1 or 2, I was in the room, And then he rolled a die again. On 1 to 3, I was dead. And 4 to 5, 6, I'd be alive. And that was it. It was like completely, utterly arbitrary that I lived or died.
It's a goblin and a rock again.
Yeah, yeah. And I almost felt more sorry for the players who were still alive because, you know, they're going to rescue and they can be good, big damn heroes. And, oh, by the way, he's already dead. He's been dead. He's been tortured to death. And it was a shame. But I don't like arbitrary stuff like that. That really kind of bothered me. And I had another character that turned out to be a lot of fun to play, but that kind of rubbed me the wrong way to start with. And so, and then the two one shots. One was anybody who knows me knows I love nanomachines. It's a big thing. I just love the concept of a nanomachine and nanobots and stuff like that. And so I played a game where this company invented a nanomachine and we were running a factory and I can't remember all the story behind it, but this game master, the nanomachines were supposed to escape and create gray goo, which is, for those who know about the nanotechnology, that there's always this self-replicating that they would go and turn the Earth into just a pile of goo as they repurposed all of the molecules into building themselves. Well, I did everything right, in my opinion, everything right to stop this, and I had it all ready to go, but damn it, they were going to cause gray goo. He had an agenda, and it didn't matter what the players were going to do, the world was going to turn into gray goo, and it just really made me upset because I spent a lot of time figuring this out. And it wasn't like Call of Cthulhu, right? I mean, there wasn't an expectation that cosmic horror is going to happen and you're going to die. We were thinking, how can we solve this problem before it gets bad?
The world was savable, but wasn't really. Yeah.
No, but really wasn't.
Yeah, that's horrible.
And then the last one is interesting. It's a great concept. So I played in the game where the individual had physical puzzles. So there was like a padlock we had to get in to this room. And so he handed us a school locker padlock. Just, because we found a document that had what could be the right combination on it. So he hands us the padlock. I don't know about you, but I haven't opened a combination lock since high school. Really, was that 3 spins and then 2 back, or is that 3? I have no idea.
Yeah,
and we couldn't figure out how to open this lock when obviously our characters could. And then once we got finished that, he finally said, okay, well, you guys know how to open the lock and you get through the lock. He handed us like a game where you build a circuit, like one of these kids' toys. And we had to build a circuit to bypass this alarm system. And so we're like going, okay, I'm an electrical engineer in training. So it was like, or I was trained electrical. So I was like, oh, I can make a circuit. But the other guys were like looking at this thing going, what do we do? How do we even approach this thing? And every puzzle was a physical challenge. So it was the height of player knowledge versus character knowledge. It was all player knowledge. I don't even know if I remember what my character's job was or what his background was because it was completely irrelevant to the story. That he was, I think he was an explosive expert. But at no time did I have a chance to plan an explosive and do anything with that. It was all these puzzles.
It sounds like that was a good thing because we could have been, here's a stick of C4, try and disarm this actual explosive.
yeah, that could have been. That would have been bad. Yeah, the nanomachines would have escaped and bad things would have happened. So those are the ones that stuck in mind. And you can see that they're all based on not letting the characters, have a win, even if there's a loss. I'm a fan of my characters, and I don't like when I feel like the game master is not a fan of me as a character. So anyway, that's my playing side of it.
It's interesting, isn't it? All of them really focus in on the loss of player agency in a lot of ways. It's like, not being able to kind of control your own fate or say a word or do a thing. Damn that dungeon master, whoever that kid was.
And I've had times like that. I think with me, those were just the most surprising and weird ones that I've had. I want to add in, Carl, pretty much any game, anytime there's in a game when they put a puzzle forward and it's like it's not a character puzzle, it's a player puzzle. I'm like, no. And there's no like, okay, your character can roll and I'll give you a hint. It's just like a bunch of puzzles. Every single time that happens, I'm like, nope. Nope. It's like the Game Master metagame. We've actually did an episode in Tabletop Tango about puzzles and stuff like that. Remember?
Yeah, we did. Yeah. It was like player knowledge versus character knowledge, and that was one of the things. How do you balance balance that and allow the characters to be successful when they should be successful because they know stuff that you don't.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's because,
they
like,
know
you know,
runes.
our characters know how to fight using. I don't know how to fight using. Well, I do know. I've never used a longsword. So yeah, your character knows how to use a longsword very well, but I don't know how to use a longsword. But the game master's not like, here's a longsword, you know. So yeah. Anyways.
So let's round it all out with game mastering horror stories. So I have a few, but I only want to focus on one because, you know, time's growing short. And this was a convention game I ran for years, and it also was Dragonlance. And this was the Dragonlance game that preceded Top Knots and Takesis. And so in this case, you go to a newly discovered Tower of High Sorcery, which I revamped for Savage Worlds and ran that at Gen Con a year ago or 2 years ago. But at this time, so there was this Tower of High Sorcery, and you had to go into it to find this artifact that could change the balance of power between the good and evil forces, as all good artifacts should, right? And I had a 13-year-old who just had to play a white robe wizard. He you know, it's like, are you sure? Because these were higher level characters. There's lots of spells. And this kid said, nope, I want to do it. And I have nothing against 13-year-olds because my children were 13-year-old at the time, going to the game and playing good games and stuff. And so I had no reason to, but, was he off the rails? He just, he wanted to stab stuff, or he wanted to use his most powerful spell against him, least interesting thing that he possibly could cast it against. And everybody kept saying, and I think his father was there, I'm not sure, but everybody would keep like putting their hand up as he was going, well, I'm going to cast Fireball. And they'd put their hand up and go, are you sure you want to do that? No, you don't want to cast Fireball right now. Maybe you cast it later. He goes, no, I really think Fireball is the right answer. And it's like, oh my God, this is not, you're in the middle of the tower going up the stairs. Why do you want to cast Fireball right now? I know it's fun, but, and then we got to the very top where you're supposed to meet the Tower Master and convince him to let you have the artifact. Kid attacked him. They opened the door. Here's a white robe wizard who's ancient and, you know, bony. He's lich-like but he's still a white robe wizard. And the kid saw him and is like, oh, evil. And he goes and attacks him. And all hell, he Leroy Jenkins. And although everyone else was like, stop, no, stop. And this was back when I had 6 characters at a table. And it was like, no. It's like, oh my God, I have never actually had to use the spell list of this white robe wizard. I guess I'm going to have to pull him out and dust him off because I've never, ever actually had to attack anybody. And he was just wild. This guy was just off the rails continuously. So anyway, I'm not doing justice to how crazy that was. Maybe it's also the best game. I don't know. So it was just crazy. So,
sounds like every other Thursday with my 13-year-old group, to be honest. It's kind of, some kids can be like that. They just want to see the world burn in a lot of ways, I think. It's funny, one of my horror stories, and all my horror stories are me. These are my fault, not anyone else's fault. Lessons learned where over time, I guess you run enough games and you get to see yourself turn into the villain. For me, one of mine was Dragonlance as well, and I was the 13-year-old, but I was the 13-year-old dungeon master. Dragonlance had just come out as the books, and at the same time, they released the modules as a companion to the books, and the modules roughly followed the way that the novels were going. And so I ran these games for my friends and then constantly corrected them when they were playing it wrong because that's not how it was done in the book.
Oh, my God.
So I would have the module out behind the screen and I'd have the book open to the correct page and I'd go, no, that's not what you do. Sturm would do this because that's what's in the book, and railroaded these poor buggers for a year. I just feel so bad for it.
Oh
later.
My goodness!
Yeah, for a year.
Wow. And they put up with it.
Well, they didn't know any
kept at
different. They didn't know it. They didn't know that's not how you play Dungeons and Dragons, and I didn't know any better. And it wasn't till later that I played a game where I didn't have a novel to determine what the players did that I realised how bad I was. So, these things happen. More recently in Call of Cthulhu, I've had a couple of shocking games that I regret in a great way. One of them, I did a Christmas one-shot for some players about 2 years ago, where they were just looking they lived all over the world. It was during pandemic lockdown. They just wanted to find a way to get together to play together again and wanted someone else to run a game that they could just play, and they asked for a Christmas themed game. And I didn't ask the one really important question that I think I should have asked for that group, which was, have you ever played Call of Cthulhu before? And didn't realise how experienced that group was, didn't realise how well they'd played together, how long they'd played together, how good their actual normal storyteller was. And I gave them the most dumbed down, kid-like, boring, obvious trope, obvious plot game ever to these complete veteran role players that were just wonderful. And they kind of rolled their eyes and kind of put up with me for a while, but as the hours went on in this game, I just felt more and more and more uncomfortable with the choices that I was making and the story that I was telling, because they were so obviously just pandering me at that point, where they just went, "This guy's rubbish, but we're here, we'll do it." And it was it made my skin crawl. So if you're running a one shot for people you've not played with before, it's always good to ask, "Hey, have you ever done this?" Just to give an idea of that. And the third one broke my heart a bit. And when you talk a little bit about players and player dynamics, player falling out is a great way. I mean, at the end of the day, people falling out around the table will kill a campaign. There's no question about it. I had a really fun little Pulp Cthulhu game going that had lasted about a year. I had 2 players drop out of that game for life reasons. One had a baby and the other one moved away. And I recruited 2 more and recruited bad blood almost immediately. One of the players had a very different way of playing the game than another very headstrong player within the game. Neither were incorrect, if that makes sense. They were both approaching the game differently. They were just 2 personalities that were never, ever, ever going to kind of be able to play together. And I persevered with that for 3 months of 6 sessions of just bickering and arguing and bickering, and I didn't recognise it quick enough to just remove the new guy that was causing the issue. And in the end, the whole game just collapsed. And it was a really lovely, wonderful game with really wonderful players, and it's just one of those things and I think we should possibly do an episode on this at some point. But that management of player personalities can be such a massive thing in terms of people's enjoyment, and I just got that one wrong. So yeah, these are the horror stories of my own doing in some ways in terms of running games. Eric, what's the worst game you ever ran, and was it the Agents of Woe?
What?
Whoa.
Well, I would say the first episode, because I was sick, and I think I tried to get too much stuff in. I think that obviously wasn't the worst game. I think so. I
was kidding.
No.
Your Agents of Woe game was amazing.
But I was
disappointed.
But I was just like, the first one I felt wasn't as good as the second one. As it could have been, because I was some other reasons. But no, the worst one for me was, again, I haven't GM'd that much compared to these fine fellows. But this one was another one that was one of my only in real life games. This one was a weird one. For a while I would do, at my local game store, they would do kind of a, I kind of got it going back up, and it was like me and a couple of other older guys, like my age guys, and it was just kind of like I think it was kind of like Adventure League, but it was like pretty kind of more loose than that. I think it was Adventure League, but it was kind of a little bit more loose, and our characters kind of continued on. It wasn't quite a campaign. And then one time, the guy who ran it couldn't show up, and I offered to run kind of another kind of basically a one shot, and so I was expecting kind of people my own age, and we're mature, so kind of getting a little bit more explicit about certain things, or getting swearing to things like that. This
where is this going?
Well, this kid showed up.
No!
And I wasn't expecting, because the game I wanted to run, and the kid, I'm not really sure what his. He was a nice enough kid, but he was maybe a little bit socially awkward. And so the 2 worst things about it were, for one, his mom was there. It sat in the, enough in like, she wasn't right at the table, but she was in the game room. And also he was like again, he was kind of he was socially awkward. We were older, and his character didn't want to do any violence. He was like a pacifist, but it was like a pretty, it's a violent game, and kind of didn't understand the yes-and-ness of D&D, and so kind of was shutting people down at the same time and wanted to do, he was like he wasn't a paladin, but he was basically lawfully stupid, and didn't want to fight at all ever. And so it just was this big like wrench in this game that I wasn't nervous about,
Yeah.
but it was one of the first things I ever game mastered. So it was just like real awkward. His mom was there. It was just so awkward. It was just so awkward. I can't explain how awkward it was with, a kid. And again, it wasn't like overly explicit. It was just like, and just shook me up a little bit. And the other time was, I think like James has said, this was something that I thought about when you were speaking, but just something that, I learned later on to be more aware of and kind of player sensibilities. And this guy, he was really into his character, and I just completely forgot his backstory. And I think his backstory had something to do with him in real life, with his like parents. I don't remember the details of it, but I just wrote something and it was just basically his backstory. And I just kind of, ran all over his backstory because I just didn't realize what I was writing was similar enough. And I kind of had to think on my feet, but basically I like destroyed his backstory, and his character didn't really make sense. So I just felt like really horrible about that, because I didn't want to do that, and it was kind of like I'm sure he had like a bad game master story from that of just here's the game master who just completely bulldoze over my character's backstory, basically. Even though I wasn't trying to, I just
deliberately ruined my dreams.
Yeah, I ruined his character just because I didn't realize the thing I was writing was so similar to his backstory, and I just had completely forgotten his backstory. So yeah, that was another one that was.
There was one time I threw a rock at a wizard and killed
just
him
instantly, and the child was crestfallen, and I said, leave in shame, and I took his lunch money too while I was at it.
Yeah, sure.
Well, that was super enlightening. Those were good stories. I'm glad we used this as the season finale because these are great. These are awesome stories. I really enjoyed them. So. Any final thoughts before I
Hopefully
get into
there's some lessons learned there, that it wasn't just us airing dirty
somewhere.
laundry. I think there was a few lessons that could be learned there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always something to learn from a good story, positive and negative, right? So every story has some moral that we can take away from it, right?
Absolutely.
Well, all right. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. I hope you got something out of it. Remember to drop by masteringtherepg.com to learn about all our other projects and contact and support us. Email GameMaster@masteringtherepg if you have questions, need some advice. We're still waiting to adjudicate some questions. And, we're already in season 2. And now imagine there was a big reverb when I said season 2 or end of season 2. And we have yet to have that. So please send us something. If you like the show, please give us a positive review on the podcatcher or site of your choice. And once again, this is Carl, Eric, and James saying goodbye. So say goodbye, guys.
Goodbye, guys.
Goodbye.